Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 160. I'm Enigmius and today we're continuing with our hover vessel. We're focusing on one specific area of the ship, and that's the top dome section. I mentioned in the last episode we had these two profiles, these intersecting profiles that sort of described a curve on both planes, from the front to the back and then from side to side. And this is probably one of the most challenging shapes I can think of to try and pull off, because it's a voxel universe and voxel universes don't do curves without a bit of work. Now you can see, based on what I was talking about in the last episode of going layer by layer and basically making an oval profile on each layer all the way down from the top to the bottom, we've largely described already what this is going to look like. You can look at it and you can see pretty clearly where we're going with this. It's not difficult to envision. And here I'm just finishing off one section that apparently I forgot. It happens to me all the time. Things that I forget that are so obvious, it's maddening. That having been said, this process of filling it in now is a little bit of give and take, and it's a little bit of understanding that in a voxel universe, of course, nothing is ever really curved. Everything is a line connected to another line, and on until you get to a point where things blur the lines between what is a curve and what isn't, based on usually how far away you are from the target that you're looking at. And how closely you're looking. There are a lot of even just plain blocks in this game that look curved, but if you get really close to them and look along the edges, you see that they aren't curved at all. They're lines, connected lines, and they're connected in a way that makes them look curved. So we're taking that basic concept and expanding on it into a much larger sort of example of how that's going to be. And you can see we just basically put together the very top layer of this dome. Now we're going to refine this particular corner a little bit so that it's a little bit smoother. That's the basic idea that we're going to be duplicating all the way down through all of the different layers in this dome until the whole thing is done. And then we can sit back and look at it and say what areas need tweaking, what areas need a little bit more attention in order for this thing to be as believable as we can make it. It's sometimes a little bit too easy to sit back and look at a ship like this and say it's not even possible, it's too difficult, we're not going to tackle it. The only way to learn is to do it, especially if our first thought when we look at something is to say that's impossible, there's no point even trying. In this case, the worst case scenario is that you're not successful. For something as complex as this can be, even if you're not successful, the chances that you're going to get through the entire thing without learning at least something are pretty slim. So it's, again, one of those things where I encourage people to just try it, mess around with it, and if it doesn't work out, so what? It's not a reflection on your ability to build things now or in the future, and it's certainly not a reflection on your intelligence. It's just the challenge of the activity. One of the things that I've learned when doing this sort of thing is that there's patterns everywhere, and if you can learn the patterns, you can duplicate them and you can get consistent results. And one of those patterns is the flow of the angles to get around a curve. It's basically a straight line to a 22.5 degree angle, just a very subtle angle, and then that transitions to a 45 degree angle. If you went with that straight line to a 45 degree angle, it's a bit abrupt. But if you put a 22.5 degree angle in between, it softens the angle and you get that one step closer to a believable curve. And then once you get through that 45 degree segment, then it's another 22.5 degree angle following along the curve back to a straight line. That basic concept is duplicated through anything that you might build in a game like this, where 22.5 degrees is really the softest angle that you're given to work with. And in this case, you can save an enormous amount of time once you recognize that pattern, and once you can kind of see just at a glance with a raw cube profile how everything will fit together. You can select one of the blocks that you'll be using to create that and just place it in all of the spots where it's going to be needed, and then you can pick up the next block and you do the same thing over and over and over throughout the entire thing. And what it does is it saves you a ton of time switching blocks. You can see here I'm not doing a very good job of that. As I'm describing it, I'm showing you the part where I didn't do it at all, and it wound up being a lot more time consuming than it needed to be. Now I get asked on a very regular basis how I switch blocks so quickly in these videos, because people don't see the menu coming up, and the answer is always I switch blocks the same way everyone else does, but I edit out the menus from the finished video so that it's not too distracting. So I know as well as anyone how time consuming it can be if you're switching blocks all the time when you don't really have to be. And you can see now I'm starting to wise up a little bit to save myself a little bit of time, not only in the game but also in the editing process, putting together the 22.5-degree angles using one block, placing it in all the spots where I can see I'm going to need it in this particular section, switch to the next block, and then continue on down until it's done. And it makes everything so much more approachable and so much more enjoyable when stuff comes together very, very quickly that could have been very complicated and take quite a lot of time. It's just one of those steps. It's very satisfying, I've found. And you can see, once you get rolling like that, it really doesn't take all that long to start filling in even a very large sort of profile like the ones that we're working with. When you think about the size of the ship to begin with, the individual layers that we're working with, and how many blocks are being placed, it's pretty substantial. It's not a small build by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't feel like a chore, because eventually I pick up on these little conveniences, remind myself to smarten up and start paying attention to what I'm doing and do it a little bit quicker and a little bit easier. And again, you can see how it's coming together like this. We're selecting one block, fill in all the spots that need that block, switch to the next one, and on through the progression. Once this is done, once we get all of these blocks in place, if you look at, for example, the top layer and then the layers just below that, there's still the area in the middle that has to be filled in. And what we'll end up doing is going into the underside of the ship, or the underside of the dome, I guess would be the better way of describing it, and just filling it in with cubes. Not necessarily looking to get the finished profiles on the interior just yet. If you've seen my other builds, finalizing the interior is usually one of the last things that I do, because there are so many changes that take place on the exterior. You can spend a lot of time doing things on the inside, and then you go back outside to finish off, and when you come back in, everything has changed. And you weren't even paying attention to it. It just happened because it was a part of the changing that happened on the outside that also impacted the inside. So this being almost complete, we now have just cubes. Cubes and mini cubes, all the cubes filling in. Basically just looking for a one block overlap with the layer above as we're kind of working through it. And what that means is you're not going to have the light shining through the edges like you get. And it gives that sort of, when you go inside to actually finish things off, you've got an understanding that you can't really remove any of the blocks that are here because they're all there for a specific reason, but you know where you're starting from, and you can decide what more you might want to fill in for more armor or for more protection in a specific area. It's one of those things. This is the easy part because all we're doing is layering in many, many cubes. Once we got this dome done, we still had to manage the transition from the dome that we just completed to the lower half of the ship that we were working on in the last episode. That was really the finicky part. That's kind of where it's a lot of placing blocks and removing blocks, and then placing some more and then removing some more, tweaking and adjusting, and you get one thing right and then you go and do something else and you realize the first area could be improved, so you remove and then you replace. Not the kind of thing that I can really show you in detail in terms of the process, but I can show you the outcome and what we were able to get out of it in terms of almost finishing the exterior hull, or the primary part of the exterior hull. There's still a lot of detail work that needs to be done, and probably several more iterations on the shape of the hull itself. But in the grand scheme of things, you can see here, as we're starting to look around now, we've got the corners aren't quite lining up, but the dome itself is a success up to this point, and you'll get a little bit of a closer look at it before we transition to the live section, looking at what I've got up to this point, specifically at the point the video is being released, complete and ready for your review. And after at least a couple of hours of tweaking, this is sort of what I've come up with, which is not a huge difference from where we left off in the last segment, but a lot of the really big glaring sort of issues have been taken care of. The corners, the transitions at the corners have been taken care of. That's no longer an issue. I've smoothed out some of the hidden profiles, and I say hidden profiles in the sense that they weren't planned specifically, but if you come back and you look at them, the way everything came together, and you sort of follow a line like that, it was kind of janky, and it wasn't really working the way that I would have liked it to. So after a little bit of fooling around with it, I've got it much closer to this smooth kind of thing. I still have a little bit left to do up here. Just kind of tweaking that a little bit. It's not going to take much. It's not going to be difficult or time consuming. The front section here didn't take much to get it working, except for this area here in the corners, because it involved basically reworking the front of the legs as well. And as you can see, me and my vents, this is actually an opening, and we've used the flat black texture, or sorry, the flat texture and the black paint to make it look very dark inside whenever you don't have a flashlight shining in there. It kind of adds a little bit of something to the front of the ship that I was looking for after spending all this time. It was still feeling to me a little bit plain, and also trying to finish off the leg in a way that I was going to be happy with and get it sort of taken care of. So we added that, and I'm pretty happy with it the way it is now. I mentioned in the last episode we had this area in here that was not really working for me. The transitions were just really kind of rough, and again, the kind of thing that pulls at the eye and not in a positive way. So I reworked that. Much happier with the way that it sits now. Coming around to the back, we've got this area back here, which is going to be the ideal place to put a bunch of thrusters. A nice flat spot that also transitions, I think, well with the rest of what we were trying to do and accomplish. Probably a little bit more tweaking I could do on this back end to make the curve more gradual, but at this point I'm not really all that concerned about it. Probably if I do anything, it might be to transition half of this 45 degree stuff to 22.5 degrees, just to kind of soften off that angle there a little bit. But if I don't be surprised. It's one of those things. And the last thing that I did is I spent a little bit more time on the outer edge of the legs. I mentioned that in the last episode, how we wanted to tweak a little bit more. I found they're just a little bit on the bulky side, which is not entirely what I had in mind when I sort of came up with this idea, but at this point we're too far along, I think, to go around making massive changes. So what I did was I just took a really close look at what I was doing with this bump out up here. If you saw the last episode, you know it was a little bit more bulky. So now it's a little bit more subtle. It's a little bit softer. And then we did the bump out that we were talking about down here on the 22.5 degree sloped part of the leg, just to kind of sell that curve, that idea of a curve a little bit better, coming all the way around like that. So the next episode, we're going to be doing a few more basically structural cosmetic details on the outer hull. We're going to spend a little bit of time probably on the interior, just kind of getting it ready to become a useful space. We can actually go inside and take a look at it. I've spent a little bit of time on it, just kind of working on making things look a little bit less chaotic. You can see this is the chaotic part, and then this is the less chaotic. This is what it looks like when we spend a little bit of time on it. There's going to be tons and tons and tons of room inside this hover vessel for us to put pretty much whatever we want. So I think it'll be suitable in a role as sort of like a extended deployment sort of ship. I've got all this stuff up here on the top. This was originally put into place because I needed to move the ship around after I had started building it, just to get the profiles adjusted and get everything set up the way that I wanted it to. This is not by any stretch of the imagination going to be in the finished design. The only thing that we can expect to see in the finished design will be the core is going to be obviously right there, and that's it. Pretty much everything else is going to be moved. The core is going to have a bunch of stuff built around it just to offer a certain amount of protection. And then I think we might actually have a proper bridge on this ship that you can look out through glass to the environment, which is not to say that you'll want to use it when you're navigating around, but at least it'll be there. It'll have that sort of option and that aesthetic that we can look forward to. So if you want to be notified about the next episode, you can see all the changes that we'll make, all the things that we'll add, getting ready. The main part of the build is going to be the detailing. So the easiest way to keep on top of that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.